You're not afraid of switching between two worlds. You're afraid that you won't be fully present in either of them. The coffee is still hot. Your laptop is open. It's 7:15 a.m. The home silence is broken by the melody of a work call. Just a year and a half ago, at this time, you would have been stuck in traffic, listening to a podcast, mentally preparing yourself to cross the office threshold. Today, your morning meeting finds you in your house slippers. And tomorrow at the same hour, you'll be in the office, because Monday, Wednesday, Friday are now office days. Hybrid work, the new normal, the new problem. Psychologists at Columbia University call this temporal schizophrenia. Not in the clinical sense, but as a metaphor for a state where the same person exists in two parallel realities, two work models, two behavioral models, two different selves. And the boundary between them is increasingly blurred. Remember how as a child, you'd cross the school threshold and feel yourself transforming into someone else? How your posture, voice, even your gaze would change. And then, you'd return home and transform again? Adults need these transformation thresholds too, transitions, rituals, only we're losing them. Michel Foucault viewed space as an instrument of power. An office isn't just a workplace. It's a space that structures time, sets rules of behavior, codes social interaction. When this space disappears 3 days a week, then reappears for 2, what happens to our psyche? Jessica wakes up at 6:30 a.m. Today is Tuesday, work from home. She exercises, has a leisurely breakfast, checks her personal email. At 9 a.m., she opens her laptop. The workday has begun. On Thursday, Jessica wakes up at 6:30 a.m. Quick coffee, hastily applied makeup, commute through traffic, 40 minutes she could have spent sleeping. At 9 a.m., she crosses the office threshold. 2 different days, 2 different Jessicas. Our bodies and brains aren't designed for such sharp transitions. Routine and predictability are the foundation of our biochemical balance. Japanese neurobiologist Kenichiro Mochizuki has shown in his research, constant changes in environment cause consistently elevated levels of cortisol, the stress hormone. This isn't acute stress, from which the body quickly recovers. This is chronic low-intensity stress that acts constantly. You might not notice it, but your body does. It creates a vicious cycle. Home is no longer fully home. The office is no longer fully the office. You are nowhere fully yourself. The hybrid world creates hybrid stress. When Robert leaves the office on Tuesday, he knows he'll be working from home tomorrow. On his way home, he continues mentally solving work issues. At home, while having dinner with his family, he checks his messages. Inside, he feels like he's between worlds. Anthropologists call this a liminal state, when a person is on the threshold, no longer there, but not yet here. A transitional state. In the traditional work format, such transitions were clear. You left the office on Friday, psychologically completed the work week. You returned on Monday, started a new one. In the hybrid format, these transitions occur every 24 or 48 hours, and each time the brain has to reconfigure itself. Viktor Frankl wrote about the existential vacuum, a state when a person loses their sense of structure and meaning. The brain needs clear categories, rules, schedules. But what if Monday and Wednesday are one reality, and Tuesday and Thursday are another? Have you noticed how you get lost in the days of the week more often than before? This is no coincidence. Our brain conserves energy by automating actions. When each day requires different automatisms, mental fatigue grows exponentially. Look carefully at your home desk. Do you see personal items there? Photographs? Books you read for pleasure? Or does it look more like an office space? Eric noticed an interesting phenomenon. For 2 years now, he's been working from home 3 days a week. And the more time passes, the less his apartment resembles a home. In his living room, there are now minimal personal items. He removed souvenirs, replaced bright pillows with neutral ones, set up a more office-like desk. I'm afraid colleagues will see too much personal stuff during video calls, he explains. Psychologist Sherry Turkle, in her book Alone Together, warned, "The digital world blurs the boundaries between private and public. But even she didn't predict that we would start transforming our homes into impersonal office spaces. Home is a place where we should feel protected, where we can be ourselves, where we recover. When home becomes an office, where do we recover? Remember the feeling when you return home after a hard day. You close the door and feel relief. I'm home. This isn't just about physical space, it's about psychological safety. Now imagine you're already home, but the workday isn't over. Where will you seek refuge from work stress? A hotel. Your home is turning into a hotel, a place where you sleep between workdays. I come to the office to interact with people, says Natalie, a marketing manager at a tech company. But half the team works from home on the days when I'm in the office, so I end up commuting across the city to sit on video calls I could have done from home. Ironic, isn't it? An office has always been more than just a workspace. It was a social organism, a place where corporate culture was formed, where informal knowledge was exchanged, where spontaneous ideas were born during casual conversations by the coffee machine. Sociologist Ray Oldenburg calls such places third spaces, neither home nor work, but places where a sense of community forms. But what happens when the office stops being a full-fledged office? When half your colleagues are just faces on a screen? French philosopher Jean Baudrillard talked about simulacra, copies without originals. The modern hybrid office is becoming such a simulacrum. It imitates office life, but without its essence. Have you noticed how your behavior changes on office days? If previously you could just work at your desk, now you feel the need to constantly communicate, compensating for days of isolation. Or, conversely, you're so exhausted from commuting that you just sit through the hours? Psychologist Adam Grant from the Wharton School of Business found 40% of positive emotions at work come from spontaneous social interactions. These interactions are critically reduced in the hybrid format. Think about your last workday at home. What time did it end? When you last worked from the office, what time did you leave? The difference is noticeable, right? Aristotle believed that time is a measure of movement. The movement from home to office and back structures our day. When this movement is absent, time becomes amorphous. Sarah shares, I start work from home at 8:30 a.m. I finish, formally at 6 p.m., but I actually close my laptop around 8 p.m., and I still check email before bed. Sarah has no spatial transition that would signal the end of the workday. There's no moment when she leaves the office and thinks, that's it, work is over. Psychologists call this the blurred ending effect. Without a clear spatial marker for the end of the workday, the brain doesn't receive a signal to switch modes and continues to work in the background. Stanford University studies show hybrid format workers work an average of 2.5 hours more per week compared to office colleagues. Not because they're forced to, but because psychologically they can't leave work. And when the workday has no clear end, there's no beginning to rest. Andrew enters a video conference, and the first thing he sees is himself, his face in a small window. Do I look tired? Is this sweater appropriate? What's visible behind me? Why am I holding my head so strangely? Researchers from Stanford University called this Zoom dysphoria, the psychological discomfort from constantly observing your image during video conferences. In a regular office, we don't spend 5 to 6 hours a day looking at ourselves in a mirror. But in the digital world, this has become the norm. British psychiatrist Ronald Laying wrote about the divided self, a state when a person is simultaneously both a participant and an observer. This state requires enormous mental resources. Added to this is the constant background stress from technical problems. Will the internet work? Will the sound hang during an important presentation? Can everyone hear me? Neurobiologist Daniel Levitin in the book The Organized Mind explains, constantly switching attention between a task and its technical aspects depletes the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making and self-control. Harvard University psychologists found, after a day of video conferences, the level of mental fatigue is higher than after a day of in-person meetings, even if the content and duration of conversations are identical. Elena, an introvert by nature, initially welcomed the opportunity to work remotely. "I can finally focus," she said. But after 6 months of the hybrid format, she began to feel anxiety before office days. Her colleague Max, on the contrary, suffers on remote work days. "I lose energy when I sit alone," he admits. Carl Jung divided people into introverts and extroverts long before these terms became part of everyday language. But it's important to understand, it's not just about the inclination to socialize. Neurobiological research shows different personality types react differently to environmental changes. Some people are genetically more inclined toward flexibility, others toward stability. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, author of the concept of flow, noted, "To achieve a state of deep concentration, a person needs predictable conditions. Constant changes in these conditions don't allow achieving flow. And this creates a new form of inequality in the workplace. Some adapt to the hybrid format more easily, some with more difficulty. And this isn't a question of discipline or professionalism. It's a question of psychological constitution. Companies that implement the same hybrid schedules for all employees may inadvertently create a toxic environment for some workers. If you recognized yourself in these descriptions, don't rush to despair. Our brain is a remarkably plastic organ, and we can teach it to adapt to new conditions. Psychologists recommend developing personal rituals that will replace the spatial transition from home to office and back. Alex, a programmer, shares, "When I work from home, I start the day with a 15-minute walk around the block. It's my virtual path to the office. In the evening, I do the same, returning from work." Another option is changing clothes. Yes, it sounds strange, but the brain responds to physical signals. Work clothes for homework, which you take off when the workday ends. Psychotherapist Esther Perel explains, "Rituals help us switch contexts. They signal to the brain that we're transitioning from one psychological state to another." Psychologist Anders Ericsson, a researcher of expertise, found the most productive professionals don't work more, they structure their time better. Set yourself clear time frames for working at home, and adhere to them as strictly as you would adhere to a schedule in the office. The technique of hard stops, when you literally get up from the desk at the appointed time, regardless of whether you've completed the task or not, may seem counterproductive, but research shows it increases overall productivity in the long term. Of course, not everyone has the opportunity to set up a separate home office, but even a symbolic division of space matters. Maria, a designer, says, "I live in a studio apartment, but I have a work chair and a home chair, and I never work sitting in the home one." Neurobiologist David Rock explains, "The brain associates physical locations with certain states of consciousness. By using different places for different activities, we help the brain switch between modes. Turn off notifications from work apps after the end of the workday. Delete work apps from your phone on weekends. Use different browsers for work and personal life." Sounds trivial? But psychologist Barry Schwartz, in his book The Paradox of Choice, proves such micro-decisions have a cumulative effect on our psychological well-being. Psychologist Richard Wiseman described an interesting technique for combating procrastination: setting a deadline, a time after which you categorically do not work. For example, after 7 p.m., I don't respond to work messages even if it's a very urgent matter. Paradoxically, such a rigid boundary forces more efficient use of working time. "We give employees flexibility," says the HR director of a large tech company. But is flexibility really a gift? Psychologist Barry Schwartz, in his book The Paradox of Choice, showed, "Too many options don't make us happier. On the contrary, they increase anxiety and dissatisfaction. Companies that implement hybrid work formats need to realize they're not just changing logistics, they're changing the psychological landscape of the workplace." Here are a few principles that researchers recommend to organizations. Create clear team days. If the entire team comes to the office on Tuesday and Thursday, it reduces frustration from half-empty offices. Invest in technologies that reduce digital anxiety. Stable internet, quality cameras, noise-canceling microphones. These aren't luxuries, but necessities. Train managers to recognize signs of hybrid stress in employees. Implement a right to disconnect policy, guaranteed time when an employee can be unavailable. Conduct regular anonymous surveys on psychological well-being. Organizational psychologist Edgar Schein wrote, "The culture of an organization is a pattern of basic assumptions that the group has learned as it solved its problems of external adaptation and internal integration." Hybrid work isn't just a logistical solution. It's a fundamental change in organizational culture that requires a mindful approach. We stand on the threshold of a new era. Hybrid work isn't a temporary phenomenon. It's a new way of organizing labor that will stay with us. So the question isn't how to return to normality. The question is how to create a new normality that won't destroy our mental health. Psychologist Carl Rogers believed in the natural human capacity for growth and adaptation under favorable conditions. He wrote, "The organism has one basic tendency, to actualize its potential as fully as possible in its environment. We adapt, we always adapt, but the price of adaptation can vary." Neurobiologist David Eagleman compares the brain to a city. It's constantly rebuilding, laying new roads, demolishing old buildings. But if changes happen too quickly and chaotically, the city suffers. We can create a hybrid world that takes into account our psychological needs, or face a burnout epidemic that the corporate world has never seen before. The choice is ours. It's yours. I began this conversation with a paradox. You're not afraid of switching between two worlds. You're afraid that you won't be fully present in either of them. Perhaps the solution lies not in the perfect organization of the work schedule, but in the art of presence. Eastern philosophy has taught the concept of here and now for millennia. Zen Buddhists say, when you eat, eat, when you walk, walk. In modern reformulation, when you're at home, be at home. When you're in the office, be in the office. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, researching the state of flow, found, happiness comes not from what we do, but from how fully we immerse in it. Yes, the hybrid format creates unique psychological challenges, but it also provides a unique opportunity to rethink what work and home mean to us. Perhaps, instead of fighting the blurring of boundaries, we can learn to live a more holistic life, where work and personal existence don't oppose each other, but harmoniously complement one another. As Albert Camus wrote, "In the midst of winter, I found there was, within me, an invincible summer." In the midst of hybrid stress, we may find an invincible capacity for adaptation and growth. Write in the comments, which part of your life suffers most from the blurring boundary between work and rest? And what do you do to restore this boundary?